Hello, my name is Erica, and I'm going to be explaining what spaced repetition is. Spaced repetition is a studying technique. There's a lot of different studying techniques. Some people like to cram right before the test. They'll look over the things and they'll try to remember them as much as they can, and with it fresh in their mind, they'll go into the test. Some people will do that the night before, and the night before the test, they'll look at the things and they'll try to remember as much as they can, and then they'll go into the test. Some people will space out the studying, and it turns out that if you compare the test scores of all of these different learning methods, spacing out the studying is much more effective. You'll remember more things on the test if you space it out. And it's not really have to do with like intelligence or whether you're better or worse than other people. It's simply a fact of the human brain. The more you look at something, the more familiar it is to you. And the more familiar something is to you, the more likely you are to remember it. You're comfortable with it. The idea is easy and close at hand. So spaced repetition is a studying technique that takes advantage of the psychological spacing effect to make anyone of any intelligence remember things really well. The advantage to this technique is that it doesn't take a lot of time. You can do spaced repetition in just 5 minutes, 4 times a day, and learn a ridiculous number of new things. That's only 20 minutes a day of studying, and you can learn way more than if you studied for 30 minutes straight, sitting down like maybe in the evening, studying for 30 minutes straight versus studying 5 times a day. You'll just remember more if you do it spaced. So, some disadvantages. It's going to involve flashcards. I know some people hate flashcards. And you're going to have to remember to do it when you wake up, at lunch, at dinner time, and before falling asleep. And if you don't do it multiple times a day, every day, it won't work. So, shockingly, you have to do the technique for it to work. Alright, so now that I've explained the pros and cons, the pro being that it does not take a lot of your time, and the con being that you actually have to remember to do it multiple times a day, now I'm going to show you exactly how that would work with an example. So I made this diagram. I titled it Leitner Spaced Repetition. Leitner was one of the many people who developed a spaced repetition technique. There's others, but with Leitner what he did was the cards that you get right, you don't look at again until the next cycle. It's basic theory. If you start with 10 and you sort them, you prompt them to yourself. You try to say the back of the flashcard when you show yourself the front. So show yourself the front of the flashcard, try to say the back, and if you can say the back, it goes into the correct pile. If you cannot say the back, then it goes into the incorrect pile. And that might take 5 minutes to go through those cards. At lunchtime, now this is where the Leitner person's technique comes in. You're not going to look at all 10 cards. You're only going to look at the 8 cards that you got wrong when you woke up. You're going to look at them again, show yourself the front, try to say the back, and either sort them into the pile that you got right, which maybe you add 2 more to it, so it's 4 cards now, or you put them into the pile that you got wrong, which is maybe you're only getting 6 cards wrong now. This whole thing might take 5 minutes. A few hours pass, and then at dinner time, you look at the 6 cards that you got wrong. You try to say the back when showing yourself the front, and if you get it right, you put it into this pile, and if you get them wrong, you put them into this pile. And one last time in the day, before you fall asleep at nighttime, you try to say these remaining 3 cards, and if you get them correct, you put them in the correct pile, and if you get them incorrect, you put them in the incorrect pile. At the end of the day, having started out with 10 things that you didn't know, you're only really unable to say one of them, but you've seen it 4 times. So some of these cards, for example, the 2 cards you got right away, you only saw once that day. And others, like this one that you got wrong, you saw 4 times that day. And the basic idea here is that the cards that you got wrong, you're going to be seeing 4 times as often as the cards that you're more likely to get right. And then the next day, you start again with all 10 cards. And it's possible that you're going to get more than 2 right this time. In fact, it's possible that this ratio might flip. You might get 8 of them right this time. So you would go through the cycle again, and I'd say it depends on the person, but in general, 3 days later, get a new set of 10. Or maybe 1 day later or 2 days later instead of 3. But you'll find yourself going through a lot of flashcards here. And maybe a week later, you'll look at a card deck. This is a deck, this 10 cards here, that you haven't seen for a week. And any ones that you get wrong, you add to your current deck. And for example, at the end of the month, maybe you'll have, oh gosh, there's maybe like 10 sets of 3 days in a month. So maybe you have 10 times 10. So you have 10 decks of 10 cards each. So at the end of the month, you would look at all 100 cards and see how many of them you can recall. And the ones that you get wrong go into your active learning deck. And the ones that you get right, you leave behind and maybe don't look at those for another 6 months. So that's Leitner-spaced repetition. The people who try it out in practice find that they learn a ridiculous number. There's a person named Derek Benass. He has a YouTube channel, and he claims to have learned 2,000 kanji in 2 months using this technique. This technique is used by digital programs such as Anki. That's what he used, was the Anki digital flashcard program. But it doesn't matter where you use this technique, in Anki or with physical flashcards that you print off or write yourself. As long as you're taking advantage of the spacing effect, which is that the spaced recall of the thing makes it more familiar to your brain and easy to remember. As long as you're using spaced repetition in digital, Anki, or printed flashcards or handwritten flashcards, no matter where you use spaced repetition or how, it's very effective. So I hope this explains how it works, and I hope you enjoyed the video.